Good afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, brought to you by the TLBTV network and also brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm broadcasting to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida. And today I have a special guest. I'm really excited to talk to Dennis Baker, who is coming to us from Tallahassee, Florida. And Dennis is a retired Navy commander, so he outranks me, and he's involved in the Florida Veterans Foundation and also an author of the book Restless Hearts, which is a book about what fallen heroes could do if they go home. So anyway, I'm really impressed with the book, Dennis, but first, let's tell our viewers just a little bit about yourself. I think you said you grew up in New York, and how you ended up joining the Navy.
I was in the throes of trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and I, being a farm boy in the Catskill Mountains, dairy farm, my folks didn't have very much. Yeah, they'd have to mortgage the farm just to give us 4 kids Christmas. And when it came time to go to college, that many years ago, I wasn't aware of college loans or anything, and my sister was off to college, and she'd come home once a month, and they'd give her $5 to spend, for the whole month. And I just didn't want to put that financial burden on them for me to go to college. So my dad, who had been in the United States Navy and served during World War II, I thought, well, I think I'll just join the military and take my chances and go off and do what my dad did. So I joined the Navy at the age of 17, and I joined in May of 1970, which was just a month before I graduated. Went on a delayed entry program, and I went in the Navy as an enlisted man, an E1. Spent the winter in the Great Lakes, Illinois.
Yeah, and it's cold there and windy.
Oh yeah, not only that, but if you think about Navy uniforms, we wore bell bottoms, so you had the cold wind blowing up these funnels that were on your legs, and just when it gets to your lower section of your body, it's really freezing when the cold air comes venting in there. And it was crazy because you'd be up there and they'd make you stand and wait to go into church and stuff, and so I learned to endure the cold somewhat up there, as much as I hated it. And then when I left there, I went to Millington, Tennessee, to go into aviation, and my scores were good enough that I ended up being a jet engine mechanic. So for the first 10 years of my life in the Navy, I worked on F-4J Phantoms, and Vietnam was starting to wind down a little bit at that time, and I actually volunteered to go be a door gunner in Vietnam. Although after I was excited when I called my folks and I said, "Hey, I'm going to Vietnam. I'm going to go be a door gunner," not realizing how they would take it. But I was all charged up because there were people coming back. In my last year in school, the year before I graduated high school, there was a gentleman by the name of Alan Milk who died in Vietnam, and it really hit our school. From kindergarten to 12th grade in this whole county, there were like 700 students from kindergarten to 12th grade. So, there wasn't a very big population. So when we lost somebody to war, that was something that really struck us hard. And so when I wanted to go off and fight, I called my mom and dad and said, "Hey, I'm going to Vietnam." And 3 days later, and back during those times, there were not cell phones or anything, and I would never have had an opportunity to talk on the phone to my father at all, because why would he call me? He was a farmer, and I would go to school and come home. But I got a phone call, and I was in Virginia Beach at Naval Air Station Oceana, and they said, "Baker, you got a call." And it was my dad. And he said, I don't know why you're doing this. It's really affecting your mom, and she hasn't slept in 3 days. She's been crying since you told her. And I never thought about that part of it. But so I withdrew my name, but a friend that I was going to go with, he did end up going, and the war did wind down. He didn't see any action. But as a result of that, and having not gone, and I guess feeling a little guilty that so many people that I knew ended up going over. Some of them died, some of them come back with Agent Orange. I wrote the book to, and this is years later, after I had my whole professional career. I continued in the Navy, and at the 10th year, I got commissioned as a limited duty officer and rose to the ranks of commander. After 28 years, I retired. And I wasn't really ready to get out, but I did get out. And that was my whole identity from the age of 17 till the age of 45. That's all I ever knew. Everybody knew me and I knew them. The Navy was a small place once you have been in there so long. And I got out for personal reasons to help with an offspring who was having troubles with some drugs and alcohol, and I wanted to help them, and so I got out. I ended up running colleges for 10 years, and then during that time, I felt like I wanted to write, and I wanted to write a book and pay tribute to those guys that I knew who went off and did fight the fight. Of course, I was on aircraft carriers, and I spent many years at sea launching airplanes just like Top Gun, and having a grand old time traveling the Mediterranean. And I felt guilty that these guys, even today, those that were in harm's way, even if it was for a minute, they were still being shot at. I was not. So I wrote the book to pay tribute to them. And I used the names of the guys that I had known as a young man growing up. And I used my father and my uncle's names because all three of my two uncles and my dad served in World War II. And so I used their names in the book. And I'd asked this one guy if I could use his brother's name. And the guy that I talked to, his name was Jim Wood, and he was a second-class petty officer in the Navy. And but when he found out that his brother Ricky had got killed in Vietnam, he received a letter from him, and he found out he got the letter from his brother 3 days after he found out his brother was killed, and he never wanted to talk about it. In fact, he'd never told his children, hey, you had an uncle who went to Vietnam because it was too painful for him. So I used his name in the book, and his name was Ricky Wood. And when the brother finally let me use his name and I put it in there, the brother actually got 2 copies from me, and he gave one to his son and one to his daughter. And he said, your uncle's name is in this book. He went off and he fought in Vietnam, and we never talked about it in our family. Well, his daughter, which would have been Ricky Wood, the one that's in the book, when the niece read the book, she was just angry. When she was seeing his name, she never got to know him. She was 47 years old, 43 years, 40, let me see, she was 43 years old. And she was reading his name, and she never got to know this uncle. And after she finished the book, she went on the virtual Vietnam Wall, and she wrote a tribute to him and wrote a prayer for him. And it was about 3 months later, around Memorial Day, she gets an envelope in the mail. And it was from a gentleman in Oakland, Oregon. His name is Ron Standiford. And he wrote to her, and he wrote, Dear Kristen, I'm Sergeant Ronald Standiford, and I just wanted to let your family know that 47 years ago, I was 10 feet away from your uncle, Ricky, when he died. And I wanted to let the family know that he died well and that he didn't suffer. And she did, she had gotten this, but out of a fictional story, a family was able to come to closure. And that veteran who had fought, and when his friend Ricky had gotten killed, he actually he was gut shot pretty badly. Ron Standiford was. It was an opportunity for him to cleanse his, and to also talk to that family and say, hey, this is what your brother or your uncle was like for the last 6 months of his life. Let me tell you all about him and what we thought of him. And so that was my greatest reward for writing that book. I give books away. I don't sell them because you know, I'll find somebody that I really admire, and I'll write a book,
Mhm.
and I'll
I
sign a
have
book.
the cover back there, and I have my copy that you inscribed for me, and I'm really grateful for that. Hey, I wanted to. I noticed you start out. You mentioned the characters in the book, and you mentioned Alan Milk, but he's one of the characters in the book. I believe he was a Marine corporal, and
Yes,
so this is really close to home for you.
yes, sir. He was a upperclassman. He was 2 years ahead of me in school, so he was a senior. I was a sophomore, and he had the greatest personality. People loved him to pieces, and he got drafted and went to Vietnam and got killed shortly after he got there, and it was you know, I wanted to pay tribute to him. And the premise of the whole book, what if fallen heroes could go home. In my hometown, in the newspaper, they had all of these guys' pictures on the cover of the newspaper, and it had written on there, "New war novel showcases local heroes." So they really did get to come home, because the generation today now knows who all of those guys were in Vietnam and that they went off. And you know, the message in the book to them is, you know, a soldier is never forgotten as long as we can say their name, or as long as we can talk about them. And there was one kid who actually was named after Alan Milk. He had Alan Milk's full name was Alan Arlen Milk, and his brother named his son Arlen Milk. And so all of these folks who lent the names of their family members for the book, they'll live forever, and people know who they are now, and it's just a great story.
That I'm really impressed with that. And what I want to do is I want to take just a moment so everyone understands about the book. In the introduction, you wrote, Restless Hearts is a fictional novel that honors all military, including active duty, reserve, and veteran servicemen and women. This is a tale of hope and destiny. The book is intended to evoke the thoughts of the reader, to examine what possibilities exist and the resultant heartache when there are abrupt endings to life. And so then in the last paragraph of the introduction, and the last sentence especially just really got to me. It says, this story shows that there is a place in everyone's life for new beginnings. That's just so fantastic. New beginnings, or at least gives readers a pause and makes them think about their own lives and their personal impact on others who make up the circles of their lives. And then here's the last sentence. This is something we all need to be thinking about. If life ended today, would your influence leave a positive, lasting footprint in the world of your loved ones? And wow, I'm reading that and I'm thinking, I have to ask myself that question, and I think everybody should ask that question. Would your influence leave a positive, lasting footprint on the world of your loved ones? So, Dennis, that's really a powerful question, a powerful thought for all of us. And your book, you know, it tells us why that is so important to us, I think.
Yes, sir. And the cover of the book has on it, it's actually from the Korean Memorial. And that doesn't get as much play as the Vietnam or the World War II Memorial. But when you walk around the Korean War Memorial and you see those statues and the looks in their eyes and everything, and I describe it in the book about this, young Navy SEAL bringing his fallen friend back home, and he's got to tell the wife and son, why that his friend is gone. And when he brings him back, and I'm not going to give the whole story away, but when this Navy SEAL and his friend, who's actually fallen, but when the guy, they have turbulence and he hits his head and he goes into a dream, and his friend's there with him. When they land in Andrews Air Force Base, they go to Arlington Cemetery, and when they crest the hill and you look down in the valley, and here's all these soldiers, sailors, Marine, Army, they're all down there in the uniforms of the day, and they're all there, and they all meet at night with a camaraderie and a bond, and telling stories about how their lives were and what was important to them. And each one of the 5 characters, we talk about the night before they go off to war, and they all end up getting killed. And they get to come back as a reward for helping this guy go back and finish the mission so his friend is alive then. As when these 5 guys, each one of them has their own story. Ricky Wood, Alan Milk, they all have their own stories. How they talk about what I should have done differently, or I did everything okay. And when they come back, how they deal with it when their family has moved on, or their family may not have moved on. In Tony and Ruthie's case, Tony was my brother-in-law. He died, and my sister died at a very young age. And so I tell the story about them, but I actually do talk about their characters and how they were so much in love and stuff. But out of this book, I took it to Lieutenant General Lawrence Snowden, and who was a twice wounded Marine on Iwo Jima. And he, for the last 40 years, up until his passing about 2 years ago, for the last 40 years, he led all of the trips to Iwo Jima, and he actually got the Japanese soldiers and the American soldiers. It became a reunion, and it became where they became one, and they respected each other and what they were supposed to be doing there, that they really weren't angry with the other person. They were just fighting for their country. And General Snowden did more for U.S. Marine Corps, Semper Fi, and he did more for Japanese-United States relations than any person. In fact, he was President Prime Minister Shinzo Abe addressed Congress and recognized General Snowden in the session of Congress. Commandant General Neller came down and gave him the 2 highest medals you can get as a civilian for the work that he had done between our nations. And I have a video of the Commandant singing the Marine Corps hymn to General Snowden. And I got to spend the last 2 years as General Snowden's kind of like local surrogate son, and I spent a lot of time with him and was at his bedside when he passed. And we became very close personal friends. He was like a dad to me. And General Snowden, when I took the book to him and I asked him, and this is the first time I met him, I went to him and I asked him, I said, would you read my book and tell me what you think? And he read it, and he called me up one Sunday morning. He said, Dennis, this is General Snowden. He said, come to my house, and I want to tell you about your book. So I got there. He had already had it typed up and put on the manuscript. And he said, you can accept this the way it is. I'll make changes, or I'll rewrite it. He said, but this book here talks about second chances in life. It talks about starting, and I have to go to a current situation in my life. My sister is dying of cancer, and she's been kind of miserable her whole life, but it's taking her meeting death for her to understand that there's so much about life to be joyful about and to build relationships rather than being miserable. And so he and Admiral Flatley both endorsed Restless Hearts. And General Snowden, here's a man that was a war hero many times over. And he said, when they were planting the flag at Mount Suribachi, he said, we saw him do it as we went past, but we kept right on going. He said, trying to keep our heads down so we didn't get them shot off. And the stories that he told that I was witness to with him were just absolutely incredible. And then one day we went to lunch, and we're sitting in Montana Ted's, and he said, Dennis, I want to write my book. And I said, yes, sir. And we just took everything off the table except for the brown paper they have on there. And we got a pen out, and we just started. I said, you can self-publish, you can do this, you can do that. But Turtle Cove Press was a friend of mine, and she helped him publish his book. And he had a lot of handwritten notes, he had a lot of electronic, and he had a lot of pictures. And before he passed away, he was able to write his book, and he had about a year of life in him. And we had a couple of book signings for him, and he was like a rock star. He was like a rock star already, but it was like a rock star times two. So the wonderful thing about this book is it introduced me to a man that I got to enjoy part of his journey. And his book is called Snowden's Story, one man's commitment to the Marine Corps. And he could never pay back the Marine Corps for what he had learned there. And at his funeral up in Quantico, Secretary of Defense Mattis was there. Well, Mattis was one of his puppies. He was one of his young guys, and so was General Kelly, and so was General Dunford. I mean, all of these guys knew him very well. I would see the correspondence come into the general on his birthday, handwritten notes from these guys, and everybody revered him. He was just incredible. But Restless Hearts got us to that point where this man was able to put his story on paper before he passed, and was able to understand that there's a guy, Don Yeager, who has written all these books with Brian Kilmeade. And Don Yeager's 11-time New York Times bestseller. And he came into the bookstore where General Snowden was signing here in Tallahassee. And people would be lined out the door. There'd be 4-star generals just standing in line waiting to see him. But I grabbed Don Yeager and I took him up to the front of the line and I said, General, we need to be like this guy. We need to be on the New York Times bestsellers list, because I was his marketer. And so Don Yeager, so the general always made it about everybody else. Whenever he signed a book, it didn't make a difference if it was a 12-year-old boy. He made it about that boy. And he would sit there. He signed, and he had infected toes, but he sat there for 4 hours solid signing until every book was gone. And he would take the time for each person. Incredible man. And Don Yeager walks up to him, and General Snowden looks at him and he said, well, why is that? Why do we need to be like him? I said, because he's on the New York Times bestseller list. So he looks at Don Yeager and he says, I want one of your books. So I walked over to the bookshelf at Hearth and Soul in Tallahassee, and I said, hey, I need to get one of these books. So I took Don Yeager's book over and I handed it to him to sign it for the general. And what Don Yeager wrote, as far as what he wrote to the general, was, all he wrote was, it's an honor to be in your presence, Don Yeager. And General Snowden sat there and wrote a really nice piece to him. But, this book has taken me on a journey. And a lot of folks that have read it, it got second place in the Military Writers Society of America in 2014. It took second place. And also the fact that so many people are interested in it. I've met Hot Lips Houlihan from MASH, and I told her that I had been talking to Alan Taylor, who is the director producer for HBO for Sopranos, Sex and the City, Game of Thrones, and we had a couple of discussions about having these stories in a matter of series for HBO. And so Loretta Swit said, hey, I'd love to be in an episode. Yeah, I've given copies to, I've met different celebs, Mark Ruffalo and others that, are interested. But, sometimes it takes a long time to get it. But the stories, and it's all about human interest. It's all about touching, humans, and reaching into their hearts and saying, what's your life about? And are you living it right every day? It's done that for me. It's helped me. And as I wrote it, it was a very emotional thing to do, to write the book, because it took me back to the scenes were so real to me as I wrote them. And I was caught up in the emotion of writing the book, because I was putting these characters of people that I knew into these settings, and I could actually see them there. And so this was, it was just so much. It took a lot out of me, but it put a lot in me as well. So it's extraordinary stuff.
You're mentioning some things, and before I forget, on the cover of the book is Military Writers Society of America silver a silver medal award. So that's something. Dennis, I belong to the Veterans Memorial Center here in Brevard County, Florida, and we help vets and are involved in a lot of activities. And we just had a veterans ceremony Monday, and we celebrated Veterans Day and had hundreds of people there. And at the end of the ceremony, there were two young Coast Guard auxiliary kids sitting on a bench. So I went over and sat down next to them. They were waiting for their rides to take them home. And I asked them, how they were doing and all that. So they asked me, they said, well, what service were you in? I said, the Marine Corps. And they wanted to know what my rank, and I told them captain and when I was in and all that kind of stuff. And they said, what's the most important thing you got out of your military service in the Marine Corps? And I said, the most important thing I got was the relationships I built and learning how to work with people and accept responsibility, and and just the whole idea of being with people and making these friends who are still lifelong friends that I had going back to, I was commissioned 60 years ago. So I think that's what you're bringing forward to us too, is we have to remember and try and get people today to understand how important relationships are and how important it is to be with people. And like in your introduction, what kind of influence will your footprint have on the people on your loved ones and those you know?
Yes, yes. It just it's amazing. It's opened up so many doors, and everybody has a story in them, and it's just getting it out there. And I've seen, I've watched tall men, come toppling down, when we took General Snowden to the governor's mansion for a Hall of Fame induction there, and there was a gentleman who is probably one of the more famous people in the state, and he walked up and working with the general, and just knowing his story after reading his story and then getting a copy of his book from the general that night at the mansion, just it was like there was so much respect for what was going on. We have Robert Doyle.
Yes.
Yes, Robert and Chip Hansen.
I was just with them a couple of hours ago because Robert is the operations manager for our Veterans Memorial Center, and right. Chip is Hansen is our chaplain, and of course he's a Marine combat vet from Vietnam. So yeah, we're all close buddies.
Yeah,
we belong in the Marine Corps League and the American Legion and all that stuff together.
Yeah, there are district directors down there in your area, and Chip and Robert do a wonderful, wonderful job with veterans. And we have 8 districts throughout the state. At the Florida Veterans Foundation, I'm the president of the Florida Veterans Foundation, and we have 8 districts directors throughout the state, so we can cover the state. And those guys do great work, and they take no pay for it whatsoever. But one of the initiatives that I think that is most impactful right now that we're doing is we're reaching out to all the aging veterans in Florida. In Florida, there's 3,100 assisted living facilities, and we figure there's about 20,000 veterans in those facilities. But then there's another 40,000 veterans that are in the state and they're still at home yet, and they want to remain at home. Well, sometimes the only way they can do that is if they get aid and attendance to help them, And so we have a couple companies. We have the National Association of Veterans and Families and the American Patriot Services Corps that we work with at the foundation, and we register and we find the benefits, earned benefits for these aging veterans to allow them the dignity to stay in their home for as long as they possibly can. The beautiful thing about this, the greatest thing about this is helping the veterans. But a byproduct of it that is very, very that's just incredible, is that the life of each claim that we're doing for these aging veterans, the average claim is about $50,000. And there's 60,000 veterans out there. We're talking $3 billion in federal VA money when we get to every one of these veterans. $3 billion in federal VA money that's going to come to the state. It's going to come to those veterans, and then it goes to wherever, whatever services they're getting or whatever, which is really coming to the state. That's going to free up $3 billion in state Medicaid money. And that's just one initiative that the Florida Veterans Foundation does. And, we're at the Capitol. We have an event tomorrow night. It's our 10th anniversary. And we're doing it at the Doubletree in Tallahassee. And, we have Coach Bobby Bowden's going to be there. He's a great veterans advocate. One of the finest veterans advocates that we've had during the time that I've been up here at the Capitol has been the Attorney General. Pam Bondi has done wonderful work with the veterans. She's very, very supportive, more than you can imagine. And she just does great work for us. It's been able to let us team with American Legion to provide emergency financial assistance to veterans that need it out there. It's also allowed us to help the DAV get vans. And in 1 6-month period, the DAV, in concert with Transportation Disadvantage, with our help, was able to transport 7,700 veterans, a total of 192,000 miles. So we're doing really good stuff. And another cherry pick item that I like to talk about is we have a young man who's with Get Help Now, 24, and his name is Ethan Edwards, and he has gotten built a phone app to where a veteran in crisis can push a button and it gets him to talk to another veteran. And so it helps that veteran discuss his problems. It doesn't have to be suicide. It can be legal. It can be financial. It could be, hey, I'm really, really angry and I just need to get this anger off of my chest so I don't go shoot someplace up. Mm-hmm. And so, it's an outlet. And what they do is when you push that button on the phone, you don't have to remember any numbers. You just push this button, and it's a veteran who's cloaked in a flag, and it takes you to a crisis center. And that crisis center has the resources of $750 million in mental health resources that are available in the state. So we do some great work at the foundation, and there's just a few of us, and Chip and Robert being one of those guys, or two of those guys.
Two of them, yeah. That's really wonderful, and I'm so glad that you were able to explain a little bit to us and to our viewers so they understand the important work that you're doing, because everything you're saying is just wonderful ways to help our vets, and there's so many vets that need help and need distress and are in distress and need our help. And sometimes just being able to talk to them and get them talking a little bit makes things better.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Dennis, can you tell anything else you would like to tell us about? And one thing I wanted to ask you about is on your Facebook page, and we're going to have links to your book and your Facebook page and Amazon and everything for you. You have a picture with a movie actor, J.K. Simmons. So tell us a little bit about that.
That picture is a picture that we had taken, and if you notice in the picture, he's going like this. And what he's pointing at is probably about 1998. Since '98, and I haven't done it hardly at all in the last few years. I was the Florida coordinator as a volunteer for Sunshine Kids, which is cancer kids out of Houston, Texas, and his kids, and they're signed out from hospitals all over the nation. They unplug them from their chemo or whatever, and they take 4 of them, they put them with a nurse, from a children's hospital, and we take them from the ages of 12 years to 17 years. And we'll take them like down to all of the theme parks, and we do everything for them. We carry their bags. We make sure they get from point A to point B. The guy who is executive director is the guy who used to play on Police Academy, and he also played on MASH, G.W. Bailey, and he plays played on Major Crimes and The Closer. And he's the executive director of the Sunshine Kids, and they're out of Houston, Texas, and they have other offices. But J.K. Simmons is a spokesperson for the Sunshine Kids. And so we've done a little bit of work together in the past with cancer kids. And, you know, sometimes you look at celebs and you go, man, this guy's a great actor. But you don't look past that because you stop because they don't tell people about it. You know, G.W. Bailey, the guy, you know, who used to carry around the riding crop in Police Academy, you know, Captain Harris, you know, you just see the character and you don't know anything else about him. But his story was that he had a niece who had, there was a woman by the name of Rhoda Tomasco in Houston. This is how it all started. And she would take the cancer kids out and just do little things with them here and there. And this one little girl who was GW's niece called him up and said, would you go with us? And he went, and he was so touched that he grew the organization using his popularity at the time to grow the organization and make it a national foundation. And J.K. Simmons, like I said, is the national spokesman. But you can go on, look at the Sunshine Kids Foundation website and see the popularity they have and see the following that they have. But that's all good stuff. It's kids that got cancer. They didn't ask for it. They didn't do anything bad. It just happened to them, and they have to endure it. And I remember the initial trips with them, to me, were just very moving. You know, they'd show up with their prosthetics and stuff and their wigs. And after about 2 days, when they figured out all the other kids were just like them, they would just let go and they would be kids. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was amazing. I mean, there's a lot of humanity in this world, things happening when we look at all the crap on, you know, diversity and stuff like that. There's good stuff out there happening. We just need to focus on the good stuff and get away from the bad stuff. Right. And life would be so much better.
And that's really, I guess, a good point or a good place for us then. So, Dennis, tell us where can we find your book, and how can we get a hold of you, or how can people, you know, find you on the internet?
You can find me at the FloridaVeteransFoundation.org, or it's helpflvets.org, and you'll see all of our initiatives on there. And to get my book, you can go to any major bookseller and just ask for Restless Hearts, What If Fallen Heroes Could Go Home, Dennis Baker, and it's a just-in-time print, so they print them as they get orders for them. Mm-hmm. And, or you can go to Abbott Press, but the best place to get them is Amazon. You can get them quickly, and you can get a used copy. You know, that's how I shop. You know, the story's the story, whether you buy it used or new. Like I said, I don't care about making a fortune on it. It'd be nice to have a series made out of it, because I think it's a story that everybody should hear, because it will help them personally in their life.
Well, Dennis, thank you so much for being such a great guest on the American Vision, and I'm honored just to be able to have met you and known you, for all the wonderful work that you're doing for our vets, and everything that you've done for our country. And thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be able to share and to get the word out about the foundation and the things that we're doing, especially for the aging vets and the suicide prevention. And give our old friends Chip and Robert a hug next time you see them. I know some folks think it's not manly to hug, but I'll tell you what, whenever I see you, I'm going to hug you. So, and thank you for your service, Bill. I love a Marine, especially after having worked with General Snowden. It's a real honor to deal with Marines. So.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Thank you. Well, I'm back, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls and patriots alike. And my conversation with Dennis was just fantastic. We had a chance to talk before the interview and also after the interview, and we've talked on the phone and we've emailed back and forth quite a bit, and the work he's doing is just fantastic. And the other fantastic thing is this book. I mean, it's just amazing. I read you a little bit about it, and just get this book, and also be thinking about the influence that you're going to have on your loved ones in life. And of course, that's something that I got to really be thinking about. And another thing I'd like you to be thinking about is 2020, a clear vision for America. And, you know, I still have some copies here that I'd be love to sign for you all. And going to make a great Christmas present or whatever. And of course, Restless Hearts would make a great present for you all as well. Present, you know, you can send to vets that you know, or family members who are vets, and are people who are on active duty, whatever. Anyway, read a book. That's today's message. Read a book, and I want to thank you all for watching, and God bless you all. God bless our America, and God save our America, because we need you now more than ever before.